Hi everyone, I'm Erin, as you probably know by now, and so I am going to talk about the Vietnam War, and I interviewed a Vietnam veteran. The Vietnam War was the longest war in American history and was also the most unpopular among Americans. It resulted in 60,000 American deaths and 2 million Vietnamese deaths. Americans today still question whether this war was necessary. Resulting from the Vietnam and France War was the Conference of Geneva. As a result of this conference, Vietnam was divided between the anti communist South and the communist North. South Vietnam now refused to hold elections with the North. By 1985, the Viet Cong, a communist party located in South Vietnam, had begun to battle the anti communist South. To support the South, the U.S. government sent about 2,000 military advisors, which significantly increased by the end of the war. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson escalated the war, beginning airstrikes on the North Vietnam. The 1968 Tet Offensive was a turning point of the Vietnam War. This was the United States' largest victory, but was not all that impactful. This changed the views of many Americans towards their government. They became distrustful of the government because they saw the mass deaths of many people. The Tet Offensive sent a wave of shock through the United States. After this, President Nixon lowered the number of troops being sent to Vietnam and eventually led to the withdrawal of all troops. President Nixon advocated Vietnamization, which called for the withdrawal of American troops. This left South Vietnam with most responsibility for the remainder of the war. To slow the movement of North Vietnam soldiers to the south, Nixon sent American forces to destroy the communist supply base in Cambodia. In April of 1975, the South surrendered to the North Vietnam. As a primary source, I interviewed my mom's friend from work, Judge Roger Daly. Judge Roger Daly is a Middlesex County freeholder, a New Jersey Supreme Court judge, and a veteran of the Vietnam War. Judge Roger Daly was drafted into the Vietnam War after his senior year of college at Rutgers University studying theology. He was drafted in July of 1967 at age 22 and received a letter that required him to report to Fort Dix in New Jersey on October 22, 1967 for training. This was a mandatory 8-week training course. From Fort Dix, he was sent to military police school at Fort Gordon in Georgia. He remained at Fort Gordon until he was sent home for 30 days, and then in April 1968, he was sent to Vietnam as a policeman. Judge Daly was very opposed to war, and still is today, but he did not have a choice since he was drafted. 50,000 men or women were drafted each month, and it was impossible to escape unless you had government connections. When Judge Daly served in Vietnam, he was told when he returned from the war that this was the high point of the war. During his time served, 58,000 men and women were killed and over 200,000 were injured. Judge Daly explained how before he went to the Vietnam War, he was very innocent and he did not understand evil. He quotes, "Going to Vietnam opened my eyes, and I saw that there is evil in this world and we must fight against it." As a military policeman in the Vietnam War, they had a base camp which was relatively secure. This was where the supply depot would be. They supplied infantry, and they would always wake up at 2 a.m., and they would have 6 different jeeps that would strategically be placed wherever the infantry needed them. When it was safe, they would travel from Saigon to Cu Chi. He did not know until he returned home that the tunnels of the Cu Chi were where they crossed, were where the Vietnam settled. When the Viet Cong was near, they would contact the infantry, and the infantry would come to protect them. He says, "War is very providential. When it is time to lose your life, that is what is going to happen." Judge Daly was very religious, being that he studied theology in college, and he believed that God was protecting him throughout the entire war. He was in Vietnam from April 30th, 1968 to April 30th, 1969. The draft only lasted 2 years and ended in 1969. When he returned home, he realized that people did not think the drafters actually went to the war, and when he returned home, he got treated very cruelly because all the Americans were against the war. The Vietnam soldiers, when returning home, were originally not permitted to be in the Veterans of Foreign Wars because no one believes that they actually went to the war. However, now he is a lifelong member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Judge Daly said that the Vietnam War traumatically changed his life. He said that he was an innocent little boy and it opened his eyes to the idea of evil. He says that good people have to stand up and fight for what they believe in. The Vietnam War costed the United States 350,000 casualties and resulted in 1 to 2 million Vietnamese deaths. Most Americans do not think the war was necessary. The Vietnam War ended in April of 1975.